Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts and welcome to my new channel. If I look familiar to you, you've probably seen me on my other channel, which is all about explaining yarny wonderfulness in terms of knitting, crochet, and yarn crafts in deep dive videos. And I recently got into doing melt and pour soap. And I found, just like I did with yarn stuff, that there's a lot of information out there, but it's not all in one place and it's rather hard to search up. So I'm going to be doing the same thing I do on my other channel, which is called Phoenix Gate Crafts. And I'm going to be doing that here for melt and pour soaps. So feel free to subscribe, like, share, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to force you into anything, but I hope you find this helpful. And today what we're talking about is how the heck to melt and pour. And we're going to start off with what the heck is melt and pour. So to explain melt and pour, I keep finding myself explaining cold and hot process soap. So what is soap? Well, all soap is basically, at its core fundamental, it is oils, fats, and lye. Now there's two different kinds of lye. One creates bar soap and the other creates liquid soap. So if you're ever wondering, that's the difference, is the type of lye. And basically you combine these three elements and a chemical reaction happens where you go from having fats, oil, and lye chemicals to having soap chemicals. This process is called saponification. If you watch a YouTube channel called Royalty Soaps, Katie does what's called cold process, where everything's done at room temperature. There's also hot process, where it's pretty much the same as cold process by my understanding, except there's also a heating element which changes the time frame. Hot process also has the tendency of splattering and creating more noxious fumes, so it's a little bit more dangerous. I've noticed that most people who do at-home soap making typically do cold process. Now, I don't call melt and pour soap making because you're not making soap. The saponification process has already happened. The saponification process primarily happens in the first about 24 hours of soap making, but then completes the entire process in 4 to 8 weeks after the initial reaction has started. There is no cure time with melt and pour soap because it's already fully saponified. It has gone through the entire soap creation process. And what makes melt and pour unique is the fact that it has glycerin in its combination of oils. Glycerin is a unique compound made from vegetable matter that basically allows your soap to melt and remelt. Traditional cold process or hot process soap doesn't do that. So I would not take a bar of Dove and try to melt it in the microwave. That's not likely to happen. You might burn it. You might get really noxious fumes. It's a no-go. Don't do it. But melt and pour soap bases are specifically designed pre-saponification so that way you can melt it and remelt it. And basically, when I make soap, I'm not making anything. I am combining a pre-made soap base with colorants, fragrances, and perhaps a few other additives to make it into a soapy art form. So I call it soaping, not soap making, because I'm not making anything new. I am just mixing. It's like making whipped cream from scratch. You might use something to whip it up, but the cow made the cream. Before we actually start soap making, there's a few things you should be aware of. Primarily, safety. the first thing you should always have, and this one is a hard rule, gloves. You want to wear gloves because although the soap itself isn't the concern, the big worry is actually some of the chemicals you're putting in. I use mica powders as my colorant, and they are teeny tiny particles that it's actually very easy to get everywhere, and I find it helps me to contain them if I wear gloves. Also, fragrance oils or essential oils, depending on which one you use, are very toxic, and they can cause some damage to your bare skin if you touch them for an extended period of time. They're very caustic. Now, they're safe in soap because we use them at such low percentages. Typically, 2 to 3% of your finished soap is fragrance. And at that level, it's perfectly safe on skin. However, at high concentrations, you never know. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Also, because I am using powdered micas, when I get to that point, I will be using a face mask. Micas are a very fine powder, and there is a chance that if I do breathe some in, I might not be able to get it out, and after too many repeat exposures, I could get fibroids. So I will be wearing a mask. I'm not too concerned. I don't soap very often. In fact, it's been about 2 weeks since I last soaped. And after this bunch of soaping that I'm about to do for these videos, it'll probably be a little bit more because I've got to wait for my next shipment of soap bases to come in. I am doing this on a budget. So I will be cautious, but if you're doing this on a professional level, if you're soaping every day, if you're handling micas very regularly, it's probably worthwhile to get an N95 mask. Just if you don't have masks, I mean, after this pandemic, why don't you? But at least use this one as basic protection, though this won't keep particularly small particulates out. The last and the other very important rule is whatever you use for soap making, do not use for food afterwards. It needs to be dedicated to soap making. Well, okay, you don't have to use it just for soap making because you can use it for resin pouring as well. Either way, do not use it for food. Yeah, I was really surprised to find out how much stuff like mica powders, the alcohol, and everything you actually can use in both soap making and resin pouring. I might start a third channel. The soap itself isn't the concern again because cleanup is really easy, and I'll go over that at the end of this video. But again, the micas are not meant to be eaten. They're not food grade. The fragrance oil is definitely toxic. You don't want to ingest it. So just making sure that anything that touches the soap making process stays dedicated to the soap making process will keep everybody in your family much healthier. And with that, let's go soaping. All right, so you can see part of my setup here. So the first thing to know about melt and pour is about soap bases. So like I mentioned earlier, and I'm probably going to say this a million times, melt and pour soap is post saponification. This is after it's saponified and become a fully formed soap. And I know some people like to add things like aloe, goat's milk, shea butter, a whole bunch of different things to their soap bases. And I will let you know now, you don't need to do that. Adding extra butters and oils and stuff isn't going to do anything for the skin, for the simple fact that you wash off the soap. Soap doesn't actually moisturize skin, it just prevents dehydration of the skin through the materials that are used during saponification to make the soap. So I have two bases here from Brambleberry. One is aloe and the other is goat's milk. These two already have aloe and goat's milk respectively in their bases. And both of these are fully made soaps. Like, I can take these out of their wrappers and I can stick them underwater and I can use them as soap. They will lather. Because they are aloe and goat's milk, probably not as much as they could if they were plain and without the extra goo, basically. But you don't need to add anything to actually make a nice soap base. I want to let you know up front that there are nice soap bases out there. And in fact, I love the aloe one from Brambleberry. This is my first time using the goat's milk. The other one that I had, which was the shea butter, was absolutely lovely as well. So I'm going to be teaching you how, on a very basic level, how to soap. So I need about a pound or so of base. So this is really easy. Both of these come in 1 pound of soap. So I am going to do this thing using my handy dandy knife. I'm going to just cut this in half. And I am not super ridiculously precise about this. Oh, I need muscles. And this actually isn't hard. Honestly, the hardest part about this is the fact that I'm cutting through the plastic. Ta-da! I'm going to use, pardon my reach, this one. And in fact, I'm going to be making a soap that is just soap. I am going to sell this on my Etsy shop. And I'm going to call it Simply Soap because it's going to be unscented and uncolored. And it's going to feel absolutely lovely on the skin because I'm using a really good base. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about soaping. After this, I'll do one with some colors and some scents and talk in a little bit more detail about the additives. Let's get started. What's the first step of soap making? Get the plastic off of your knife. That might be soap, but I'm not willing to risk it. All right, actual first step, cutting the thing. So most people tell you that you need 1-inch cubes. And personally, I feel that's a little bit big. I mean, you can, but the bigger your chunks, the more time it's going to take to melt them. There are 2 different ways, generally speaking, that you can melt your melt and pour. One is a double boiler system. And this is very easy to set up. It's just like a double boiler if you're going to be melting chocolate or anything like that. You're going to set up a pot of water, a bigger pot of water, and then you are going to set your melting thingy, this is my melting thingy, into it with the soap inside the melting thingy. And you're going to periodically mix your soap so that way everything heats evenly. And then once it's just all melted, you'll take it off the heat. If you're going to do that, don't use plastic. This will melt. In fact, these 2 containers I have right here, I got from Amazon. They cost about $5, and I really like them because it has this little pour spout right here that is going to actually be very handy during the second project. But I like small cubes because smaller cubes melt a little faster because it doesn't take as much heat energy to melt them. And make sure if you're doing this with any little kids that anybody who is not wise enough to be safe around a knife does not get to use the knife. No personal experience there with that one, except for quite a long time I was the person who was not safe with the knife. And if you talk to my husband, I may not still be safe with the knife. So, you know, being careful. So nobody has to rush to the hospital to glue a finger back on or anything weird like that. So, little pieces. Now, I keep saying this is way smaller than an inch. So 1 inch on my finger is from this knuckle to this knuckle. Everybody tells me it's supposed to be this joint to this first joint, but that is actually more like 3/4 of an inch on me because I have tiny, delicate little hands. It's more like this. And if I did that, it just takes so much longer. I don't like it, man. So once you've got this one all done, I'm actually going to switch. I'm going to scooch this over here, and I'm actually going to go get that one. Voila! And, haha. And then I'm going to do that with everything. Best tip I could possibly give you is use muscles, but more importantly, get everything prepared before you heat your soap base. Because if you don't have it prepared, there is not very much time once you've heated the soap base. Whoops, that's a no-go. All right, we're gonna do this. Once you've melted your soap base, it's only going to stay liquid for 1, maybe 3 minutes at the very most. And you are not going to have very much active time with it. That is the downside to this method of soaping. So having everything ready with what you're going to do, it will be extremely helpful. So I'm not doing any colorants or anything, but I am getting everything cut up. And that way, in the second one, you're not going to have to watch me cut everything up. I will just have it done, and then we'll talk about additives. Now, I'm not doing the double boiler system because that takes a bit of time and a bit of pre-planning because you got to get your water hot before you can start doing the soap. And if you decide to do a double boiler system with a crock pot, that can take even longer because they're slow. So instead, what I am doing is I am using the microwave. You go ahead, once you've got everything cut up, you can stick your soap in the microwave for anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. I usually start at 30 seconds and then I stir. And then I go and see if I need another 10, 15, 20, or 30 seconds. As you can see, this is only partially melted, so I use a nice little plastic spoon and give it a stir. You do not want to overheat this. Just liquid is liquid enough. If it boils, it winds up not pouring properly. It can change colors. It can smell bad. It'll burn and won't behave the way you need it to. So it's just best to do just enough melting. I don't think this needs a full 30 more seconds. I'm going to do 10 seconds and see what happens. All right, as you can see, this is fully melted. And it's got a few little bubbles in there. You can just see them on the edge. That is not particularly good. So what we do about that is we spritz with alcohol. 90% rubbing alcohol or more actually destroys the surface tension. Oops, I forgot to do something. It also kind of acts as a soap glue. So you do want to spritz before you pour because it'll break the surface tension of, oops, I had a few chunks, that wasn't good. Probably could have stood to do a little bit more, but that's okay. This is hardening fairly quickly. See what I said about not having very much in the way of time to manipulate it. Sorry for the funky angle on that. But ta-da! First layer done. And now I'm going to go do my second layer. Now, some people will tell you that you can reheat melt and pour soap up to about 5 times. Personally, I disagree with that. What you'll want to do is only heat it once if possible. Every time you reheat it, it loses a little bit of its integrity. It doesn't pour quite so well, and glycerin soap is a humectant. What that means is that it draws water to itself from the air. And it also, as it cools, this one still has a few little chunks. You kind of have to pull them out that you can see them. That's not an ice cube. So this might have to go in for about 10 more seconds. Yeah, I'll just real quick, 5 more seconds here. You'll notice that as this cools, it develops a skin. Melt and pour is very much like pudding, believe it or not. As it cools, it develops a skin, and that skin on top gets thicker and thicker and thicker because it's the result of cooling and solidifying. So depending on what you're trying to do, you might want a skin and you might not. I'm doing a weird thing where I don't care if there's a skin or not. These might just, I kind of want a quasi-swirled effect between the clear and the white, and a slight skin might help with this, but I am doing this too hot. I have a handy dandy thermometer, and it's at 128.8 degrees. That actually might be pretty okay for what I'm not really trying to do. I'm just trying to put one over the other, and I want them to mix a little bit. A higher temperature, see, I can get that. There we go. It creates a pretty neat effect as it breaks through the skin. And melts that top layer. See, that one didn't do it too well. I didn't have enough oomph. And this one just doesn't quite have enough. I'm going to have to do a little bit of scraping to maybe fill it a little bit more. This aloe one is not cooling and solidifying nearly as quickly as the goat's milk did. Anyway, then what I'm going to do, while it's still hot, I'm going to swirl it. You don't have to do any swirling. You don't have to do anything. If you want to do a swirl effect, you do want it to be at a lower temperature. Yeah, that one is, nope. Well, I think that's a pretty neat effect. And then let's see if this one will do it. There we go. Get it a little bit more up. Let's try this again with this one. Yeah. You don't want to swirl it too much because it's not going to cooperate. Now, getting back to the rubbing alcohol that I sprayed, if I was doing solid layers on this instead of my weird swirly thing, I would have done very well to let more time pass between layers. So I wanted this kind of swirly effect. So this was on purpose. If you want flat layers though, like if you want to have a solid layer, then a solid layer, then a solid layer, you're going to want to allow a good 40 to 50 minutes between each layer. You want it to be solid enough that adding more hot melt and pour on top is not going to break through the way that these ones did here. You want it to stay solid. You want to have your second batch of melt and pour between 120 and 130 degrees, and then you want to pour slowly. I wanted to break through, so I only allowed a few minutes between, and then I poured fast with hotter melt and pour so I could create this effect. Now, with layers, you do need to use the rubbing alcohol, because if you spritz the rubbing alcohol between each layer, somehow, chemically speaking, it bonds the soap from one layer to the other. Oh, I forgot something. Also, rubbing alcohol sprayed on soap that has just been poured. Give it about like half a minute so that any bubbles in it can rise. And then you will be able to spray the rubbing alcohol, and the alcohol breaks the surface tension. Now, how much rubbing alcohol do you want in your alcohol? So you can use 70% rubbing alcohol. It's not recommended because the water evaporates slower than the isopropyl alcohol does, and you might wind up with water stains on your soap from the droplets that will form. That's why they recommend between 91 and 99% isopropyl alcohol works best. So now I just have to let this sit here for a while. I'm going to let this sit for at least 2 hours, so that way it can fully cool down and it can fully solidify. So because this is already soap, there is no saponification process happening now. It is literally just cooling down and solidifying. So I'm gonna not touch this at all for a good 20 minutes or so. Then I'm gonna scooch it off and start the process for the colored smelly soap that I'm gonna show you how to make. All right, I know it's been forever, but welcome back. And now let's talk about some of the more complex things you can do with melt and pour. Basically, you can add colors and you can add fragrances. So anything you add to melt and pour, well, the amount of it's going to change depending on the specific base you're using. I am using the remainders of the Aloe base, and this is the remaining ½ pound. The proper way to measure it is to tear it out. And then that way you're getting the only measurement that matters, which is the soap. And you want to make sure you know exactly how much you're doing. I've got 8.1 ounces here. 1 pound is 16 ounces. So I'm at pretty much a ½ pound, which is good because now I need to calculate how much colorant and fragrance oil I want to add to my little soaps. Because right now I'm going to be doing these flower molds, and you may not be able to see it very well, but I added a little bit of sparkle. I just used a paintbrush, dipped it into my sparkles and my colors, and I painted it into some of the molds. And that's all I'm doing there. But I do want the actual melt and pour to have some color, and I want it to smell nice. Now I might use these as embeds, but I figured if I'm doing colors, I might as well also talk about fragrance oils. Now, you don't necessarily have to do just fragrance oils. You can do essential oils. However, essential oils are more potent than fragrance oils because fragrance oils are synthetic oils, whereas essential oils are quote-unquote natural. They're not regulated, so it's really hard to tell if they actually are. But because they're the purest form of scent, you don't need as much. Now, using fragrance oils, now you do need to do this by weight. Now, each base can only have so much additional components in, and each individual base is going to tell you how much you can put in. What you need to do is find out how much your particular base can hold. Most bases can only hold 4 to 6% additional components. And that includes your colorant, that includes your fragrance oil, that includes any botanicals you're also adding. So what you do is you calculate the portion of that. As you saw me do already, for 16 ounces, I need about 0.28 ounces of fragrance oil. I'm doing half of that, so I need half of that in fragrance oil. I am doing about 0.1 ounces of fragrance oil because I just realized that this scale doesn't have a second decimal digit for ounces. So I already measured that, and I am using glass for my fragrance oil because this can eat through. And my fragrance oil is also from Brambleberry. It's called Frosted Sea Glass. Now, I'm also going to be doing colorant, and I use Mica colorants. So I'm using red mica. And there's two kinds of colorants. The first one is liquid soap colorant, or liquid soap dye, however you want to call it. And basically it's some form of color added to glycerin that you can then add to soap. Or you can squirt in a little bit of glycerin, or in this case rubbing alcohol, just enough to get it a bit wet. And then apparently that's about 3 ounces. You can take your color and dump it in. Now, mica is a very, very light powder, as you can see. It does not take very much to get a pretty intense color. I am going to be using, let's say this much. I probably am using too much. But here's the thing, I don't have to dump all of this in. And you stir it and you get it all nice. Whatever you do with colors or fragrance oils, you want to do before you melt your melt and pour. Because if you do it after, your melt and pour will solidify. And as I stated before, it's not a good idea to melt your melt and pour too many times. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to melt my melt and pour just like I did before. All right. This is looking good. Nice and melty. All right. So now I'm not going to bother spritzing anything because now I'm going to add my fragrance oil and my color. So I'm going to start with the fragrance oil. Just going to pour all of that in. It's not very much. I'd rather go a little light on this because if you're using these as embeds, you don't want the embed scent to clash with the scent you choose for the thing. So typically I leave embeds unscented. And now I'm going to start adding some color. I'm going to mix this a little bit better first though. Don't want to just be pouring the booze because you know it's not drinkable booze, so we don't care. Anyway, so we add a little bit and then we mix it in. And I don't quite like that, so I'm going to add a little bit more and mix. And I'm making flowers, so this is perfect, kind of a pinkish red. And that's all it is to add color. Now at this point, if you're going to be adding any botanicals or anything into your mix, you'd mix it in here now. Typically, you go to the max your base is or less. Most bases allow 4 to 6%, so I could probably do some poppy seeds, but that's not the look I'm going for with this soap because I'm doing flowers. So now I am just going to try not to spill. I really like this long spout because theoretically I shouldn't be spilling too much. You know what? Let's not be brave. Let's do this intelligently. Get everything lined up easy. Ooh, too much, too much. It does kind of fill it as you go. Being very careful, I overdid that. Okay, this may not work out too well. Let's do these slightly deeper ones. Oop. It is a very delicate thing I do right here. All right. It does not help that I am blind. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up to it. Whoa! Well, you get to see me make a fool of myself with some of these. That's okay. We can shave off some of the back and clean it up later. Okay, well, that's a little bit overdone. Let's see, I've got some pretty flowers here. Let's not go too nuts. These are silicone molds. Oh, see, I've got a skin forming. Not going to be able to do this too much longer. All right, I'm going to pour. I like to make these mess-ups, as I like to call them. They're just little bits of extra, and you can kind of pour them wherever. And now I'm just going to do this one and this one. But there we go, finished that out. And now I'm going to clean up some of this stuff. I'm not going to move anything for a while now. These small embeds probably only need to cool for about an hour. The big ones need a total of 2 hours. And if you're doing a whole loaf, that needs about 4 to 6 hours to fully cool and solidify. You don't want to unmold too early, no matter how excited you are, because you're going to squish your soap at that point, and then all of this work that you just did would be for nothing. So better to just be patient and let it cool and don't mess with it, and then handle anything that comes from it later. But these absolutely teeny tiny molds, I'm going to have to clean them up. I'm going to use my knife and pare it down. And I'm going to come back in a couple of hours and actually show you the unmolding and the cleaning up, the beveling, and the wrapping. But that'll be in about an hour or two, so I'll tidy this up and I'll see you then. All right, it has been nearly an hour, and I am ready to pop some of these puppies out of their molds. So this is honestly the easiest part, and it's the relatively safest part. I don't even need gloves because all you have to do is take them and ever so gently pull them out. Now, when mistakes happen and you overpour, for example, that is perfectly okay. Everything comes off of silicone molds super easily. And as you can easily see where the mess ups happened. And if you want, you can just cut around it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You might want to do just kind of a general outline cut. And voila. Put these into a pile. You can save them so that you can use them as little toppings, but now I have a beautiful, delicate little flower. I really like that. And I can pop all of these out of these molds right now. I'll probably spend more time than I'd like actually cutting these. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the detail. You can't do this by hand. Molds help so much. Now, this is the one I'm super excited about. Oh, I didn't get the end. See, I didn't pour that right there. Oh, well. Well, you learn. I am learning. I am fairly new at this myself. Just whatever you do, be gentle. If it doesn't want to come, don't force it. If it's falling apart in your hands, it's probably not done. Give it another hour or two and then try again. Like this one right here is still a little bit soft. You can't see it. It's just a little bit soft in the mold, and there's still a sort of warmth to it. So I wouldn't try unmolding these right now. In fact, it's still 86 point something degrees, 0.2. So I'd wait until it got down to full room temperature. And remember, it's a little bit warmer on the inside than it is on the outside. And let's try some of these. Yeah, look at that. Look here. Some nice little embeds. They look like they should be gummies. These are still a little bit warm. Ooh, this one's still soft. This is the perfect. See how it's soft and it's still moving? Like right here. I'm going to put this back in the mold. It needs to firm up a little bit. And if I force it right now, it's just going to kind of sink and it's not going to solidify properly. So I'm going to leave the rest of these. These feel fine, but don't unmold too soon. Yeah, that's soap making. I figured we'd talk about some things you shouldn't add to your melt and pour soap. So I'm actually going to leave a list of allowable botanicals in the list. So something I was kind of studying around because I don't multitask very well is that there's only so much that a melt and pour base can hold, and the important things to make sure that get into it are the colorant and the fragrance. Then you can add the remaining amount that you are allowed based on weight, because weight is the most accurate form of measurement. Then you can add in any additional little things, so like glitter, calendula or marigold petals that have been dried, poppy seeds are okay, dried used coffee grounds are okay, but it's actually a very restricted list of botanicals that are okay to put into melt and pour, because Melt and pour, having glycerin in it, is a humectant, like I said before. A humectant draws moisture to it from the air. That's why it's really best, if you're going to be soaping, to do it in a relatively dry environment. If you're very humid, expect to get sweat. Because it does sweat and draws moisture to it, a lot of things that you would use in cold process or hot process soap are no-goes with melt and pour. Like chia seeds. I mean, they grow through anything. That's why you had chia pets, you know, chia. Also, because melt and pour has already gone through the saponification process, there is no caustic lye that sanitizes everything inside of it. So it will, anything you add has the germs that are already on it. So they're going to rot because they already have the microbiome for rotting with them, and now they've got the moisture and they're at room temperature, which is the perfect temperature for things to grow. And over time, usually a matter of a few days to a few weeks to a few months, you will wind up with rot. That's why if you're putting oatmeal in, 1, do not add any water. 2, do not use any kind of quick acting or fast cooking oats. You want to do the steel cut kind or whatever the slow whole grain oats are. And you really don't want very much, like I said, because whatever your soap base's maximum limit is, you don't want to go past that, because bad things tend to happen if you get too much. A big thing that happens if you do add too much is that your melt and pour isn't going to hold together. And if you add anything with water in it, there's a chance that it might not harden at all, because it's just sciencey explanation here. So basically, when things are cool, the bonds that connect the chemicals coalesce usually into a more rigid structure, and they slow down or even stop moving. This is the solid state. As they heat up, they start agitating and moving and expanding, and you get liquid. You do that even more, you get gas. And boiling is the change from a liquid to a gas state, and freezing is going from a liquid to a solid state. So your melt and pour is just changing states based on heat. It's not chemically changing at all. But if you get too much stuff in there, as it cools and it solidifies, it won't be able to make those chemical bonds that makes it a sturdy bar of soap. And adding water just creates a situation where you can wind up with rot or mold. So don't do it. Double check anything you want to put into your melt and pour soap just for safety, because it really is a shame that you worked very hard, made plans, actually went through with them, got the timing right, made a beautiful bar of soap, and you give it to your mother or your friend or your sister or whomever, and it's not supposed to be green like that, or actually more likely black. And it's gross, and now it smells funny. You just don't want that to happen. So just be cautious and make sure that you're putting stuff in from the approved list, which is in the description box. All right, and last thing, now that we actually have our little bars of soap, cleanup is easy. So because we're not actually dealing with lye, it's already used up and we have soap instead, cleanup is actually very, very easy. I'm not going to show that because I can't have that set up in my kitchen, but it's super easy. Anything that's touched soap, so the cutting board, the knife, any other cutting tools that I use, the molds, the pouring pitchers, anything that has touched soap can be washed very easily. Take your clean sink, get your water from your tap as hot as it'll go and fill up your sink about half full with water. You don't need to add soap because you already have soap on everything. Then just take a washcloth and scrub it out to make sure that all the leftover soap dissolves. Rinse it real good and then allow it to dry in the drying rack. Because you've gotten all the soap off of it at this point, it's okay to have in a drying rack. Anything that you use that's disposable, just throw away. Not a big deal. The only thing is the fragrance oil. So as you noticed, I used 2 little glass jars for my fragrance oil. And that's because fragrance oil is very caustic. I one time got my fragrance oil ready far too early, and by the time I came back to it to use it, it had eaten through that tiny little plastic cup and had completely spilled out all over the counter. That's why I use glass, and I use glass jars because you can screw on the lid. So once you've gotten everything else done, you now have warm soapy water in your sink. Take your little jars and rinse them very thoroughly. I would use gloves for this step. You don't need it for the other steps. You just need it for this one. And you will rinse it out as good as you can. Then you will get some soapy water, and using your glove-covered fingers, you can just swirl it around and then dump it out into the rinsing side of the sink. And then you can rinse it out real good. These I would not allow to dry in a drying rack that could potentially house food items. I would take a paper towel and fold it up several times and then put the jars upside down on top of it until the outside is completely dry. Then I would turn them on their sides, because all the water's probably come down to the bottom of, where the lids were because they were standing upside down. Just set them on their sides and let them dry completely. Do the same thing with the lids. And at this point, they'll be safe enough that you can handle with bare hands, and you can screw on the tops when they're fully dried and put them away. Everything else, super easy. No additional soap required for any of this. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I hope I didn't get too confusing with it. And if I did, please leave me a comment and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If there's too many questions about one thing, I'll probably make a video explaining that better. Now, if you're interested in purchasing any of the soaps that I made today, some of them will be appearing in future videos as embeds. But the Simply soap is available at my Etsy shop, which is etsy.com/shop/PhoenixGateCrafts. And you can purchase it there while supplies last, of course. And yeah, good luck. Happy crafting. Bye.